When it comes to the cost of living, we know almost everything is costing more. But here's the kicker. On items like cell phone bills, milk, gas, and air tickets, those all cost more in Canada than they do in other countries. So why is that? Money Sense Associate Editor Justin Dallaire is joining us from Hamilton, Ontario this morning. Good morning to you, Justin.
Good morning.
All right, just to set the scene for everybody, in Europe, cell phone plans can cost as little as $30 a month for 100 gigabytes. The same plan in Canada costs on average $140. Please tell me why cell phone bills cost so much more in Canada. And just as a disclaimer to this item, CTV is owned and operated by Bell.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So it is cell phone bills are probably the one that people think of the most often in terms of what Canadians are paying more for. The most basic explanation is that we pay more for mobile data. I think in most cases, you'll see that plans can be comparable in other countries, but it's really on the data front that we pay a lot more. One of the reasons that have been cited the most often for why this is purely competition. There are three big cell phone providers or wireless carriers in Canada. And yes, they do offer some smaller brands, some flanker brands, as they're called, that do have discounts on certain services and things like that. But ultimately, there are three players. The market is pretty much dominated by them. And so that tends to lead to having some higher fees on your wireless plans.
I know. Knowing why it happens doesn't make it feel any easier, though. So something that costs more in Canada, we know, is air travel. A flight on Air Canada costs on average about $123.50 to travel 100 kilometers. In the U.S., the same distance is $23.55. In Belgium, it's $54.63. And in Sweden, $7. So can you explain the difference of why Canada has such higher travel costs?
Right. I think, again, I don't want to just necessarily repeat myself, but I think, again, it comes down to competition. You have WestJet and Air Canada that dominate a good part of the market in Canada, and that necessarily leads to a little bit of higher fees. We also have airport fees that are quite a bit higher in Canada than elsewhere. One of the reasons for that is that airlines in Canada are owned and operated by the government, and so there are certain fees that are charged to the airlines to operate. Ultimately, those costs get passed down to consumers. One good example is the airport improvement fee charged out of Pearson Airport, for example. That's currently at $30. It's going up to $35 next year. It's just these different little ways that costs get embedded into your plane ticket. And lastly, I think one of the more recent developments in Canada are the existence of ultra low cost carriers. Those are airlines that offer discounted rates. It's called like an unbundling of services, so you can pay just to buy your ticket, but then you'll be charged extra, for example, if you want to check a baggage. And so that's a relatively recent development in Canada compared to some other countries, and maybe eventually that will lead to some lower costs. But for now, it remains very expensive to fly in Canada.
Yeah, no kidding. It is a cost that affects everyone, this next one. That's healthcare. And it's another area where here in Canada, we spend more. Countries with the highest health costs per person are in the U.S., Germany, and Switzerland. Canada ranks 8th amongst the most expensive after Ireland. So can you break down why costs in Canada are still so high?
Unfortunately, I don't have too much information on that. It's not an area that I would necessarily feel comfortable commenting on. I know like you said, it is an issue in Canada. It's one that needs to probably be looked at, but it's not one that I have too much information on.
Let's go on then to take a look at milk. These are the small items, as you know, that this drives everybody crazy, that we pay more for small items. Canadian milk prices rank 5th most expensive globally. The Netherlands, UK, Sweden, and the US, they're all at the lower end for milk costs. What is behind our high milk prices?
One of the reasons is probably because we have supply management in Canada. That applies to dairy, eggs, and poultry. And essentially what that means is that the government works with dairy farmers to ensure that the agricultural business is stable. And ultimately what happens is prices are set, are determined in advance in terms of what dairy farmers are going to get for their product. A lot of people say, that ultimately leads to higher prices for Canadians. Even if you look at what's happening right now, earlier this year in September, the prices went up by, the costs or the money that dairy farmers were getting went up by 8%. That was the highest it's ever been. And then in September, we also had a similar hike of 2.5%. And essentially that goes to the dairy farmers to help them maintain their businesses, to make it attractive to be a dairy farmer, and to make sure that there's a good balance between supply and demand. But again, a lot of people will say that that leads to higher prices as opposed to having a more open market.
Again, knowing the why doesn't make it any easier, but what choice do we have? Justin, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.